There we go. We'll just use that. So I like to start out with this number. It's a big number, $1 billion. And $1 billion might not seem like a lot to some people, but even in Cisco's world, $1 billion is a lot of money. And $1 billion for us represents how much we spend annually on our OpEx just for our real estate portfolio. $1 billion. That includes all of our leases, that includes all the OpEx, that includes all the maintenance that goes into running our real estate, which is big. We have a guy who runs that business, and he's tasked for optimizing it. And I'm going to try to today give you a little bit of enlightenment on how he sees our business. And he is definitely one of the forward thinkers in the real estate industry. And our job in the company is to try to share that vision with as many other real estate professionals as possible. And real estate and facilities come together in this conversation today. So I'm really looking forward to it. That $1 billion for Cisco represents our need to cover about 75,000 employees. It's also about 18 million square feet of real estate portfolio. We do business in almost every country, and each country has at least typically one office, often multiple. However, interestingly, we spend about $1 billion, and our space is very underutilized. So we're spending a lot of money for something that just has very little value to us at the corporate level. And so for us, we stepped back and we said, is this a new problem? And interestingly, for Cisco, it's not. We've been looking at this since about 2013, and at that time we looked at our badge-in rates, which is a good indication of how many people were getting into the office, and it was about 50%. And then we looked at the actual utilization rate inside of the space, and it was about 28%. And so you start to see that even as of 10 years ago, we had an underutilized portfolio. But at that time, we were spending a lot more money, about $1.3 billion per year. And for that, we started to look at the business and try to understand what our options were. And the first option was start to shut down offices. And so 10 years ago, we started that journey. And we started shutting down offices. And we started to consolidate in cities where we had multiple offices. And we really thought through that process we would save a lot of money. And we did. The OpEx dropped, our CapEx went to other budgets. And then interestingly, we came back and looked at, okay, now how do our badge-in rates look? And they didn't change. So after all that work of really trying to consolidate the footprint, we couldn't put a dent on our badge-in rates or our utilization rate. And so what does that tell you? It means that the technology was moving faster than our ability to actually consolidate our real estate footprint, which is kind of scary, right? But it's also interesting. Now, fast forward just a couple years, and what did we all experience? The pandemic. And then suddenly we had a major real estate problem. All of us had the same problem. Fortunately, Cisco had a little head start. We already had a workforce that was used to being a little bit more hybrid. We had about 90% of our employees that would work from home at least one day a week. We had about 50% of our managers that had at least one remote employee. But this was very different. And we needed leadership to step in and really give us some guidance on how we were going to navigate for our employees getting through the pandemic and then coming out. And so Chuck Robbins is a really solid leader, and he came out and he said, we're going to make the office a magnet, not a mandate. And that was really interesting for us because we had already this diverse workforce, and we were trying to figure out how to come back from work and to work. But the policy that he set was simply this. The policy is there's no policy. All right, so it's up to every manager, every employee to work out what their proper mix is between getting to the office, working from home, or working remotely from wherever they need to. And so that was interesting. We had to build a strategy around a very loose policy because that was our company culture. So for today, what I thought I would do is kind of walk you through a couple of chapters in the story. And the first one is, how did we start out? What did we do initially coming out of the pandemic to try to build our portfolio and rebuild our culture? And then how do we apply that to what we now consider to be the North Star, and how does that North Star apply to our business objectives? And then finally, since we've done it, we've started to share this with other companies that have embraced similar models, and I'll share some examples of that, and there's many, many others, but we'll start it out. And then finally, your call to action. we see real estate and facilities as being the yin and the yang. One has to build, one has to operate. And I think this is a good point for the intersection of those to come together. So here's some of the QR codes I mentioned. So if you can get them here, you can get my, we'll have a couple of things. My slides are there, and then I'm also going to share at some point in the deck our design guides of how we actually designed our rooms, and it'll make more sense when you see that slide. But in case we don't get to the back end of the deck, for some reason, at least you've got it up front. So what we realize is the future of work is here now, right? So we keep saying the future of work, but the future is now. But there's three real important things to understand. It's not going to go away. It's permanent. We realize that this hybrid environment that we're in now isn't going to change. For Cisco, our employees are still going to have to maintain flexibility. They're going to need some combination of working from home, but also coming to the office. It's not one or the other, and we don't see that changing anytime in the future. The second thing that's interesting is it is mission critical. For us, our employees are our greatest asset. And with 75,000 employees that are a great asset, we have to be very careful on how we manage their expectations and manage our culture. And so for us, figuring this out is a top priority. The last part is that it's got to be dynamic. We know that one size doesn't fit all. We can't set one policy because we have so many diverse needs in the business. We have so many different types of workers, so many different types of workplaces, and so many different types of customer needs. And so we're going to talk about that dynamic nature over the next couple of slides. Okay, so when we talk about dynamic, what do we mean? We keep coming back to, and you'll see I'll point to this in two different places in the story here, this intersection between people, spaces, and technology. From a people perspective, it's really about that culture. How does that culture interact with that workspace? Where that workspace is, whether it's in the office, and in the office, where in the office, and what are they trying to do in the office, and what is that office space intended to do for the business? And then, of course, the technology. Cisco's a strong technology company, but we don't have all the answers. We try to apply the technology we have, but we augment that with a lot of third parties, and we try to come up with a holistic solution for space. And so that intersection is what we're going to drill into a little bit more. So what was our starting point when we started the journey? Well, it wasn't great, right? We thought we had pretty good locations, we had pretty good real estate, but our offices were still not all that desirable. We hadn't earned the commute. So our office being a magnet, not a mandate, was going to be tricky when we were starting out with a footprint inside of the space that looked like this. And you can see it's not terrible, it's just not all that interesting. It's not something that would earn the commute. And so when we looked at it, you can see it kind of has a throwback.
Are you Cisco, the food company, or Cisco, the computer company?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Cisco, the technology company. Yeah, that's a good question. It's not the first time I've heard that. I realize that in this industry we're a newer name, but Cisco, the technology company. Thank you for asking. So this is one of our offices here, and you can see it's kind of a throwback to the early 2000s. You know, the furniture style, the layout, the lighting, everything about it just looks like a typical office. And if we jump forward here and we look at some of the other spaces in some of our buildings, it's kind of dreary. It's older furniture. The furniture is not integrated with the technology. It's just kind of blah. If you look at this slide, what's interesting is we try to incorporate a lot of video technology into our workspaces, but on the bottom right, you can see we had a little bit of ambient light coming in, natural light that was coming in, and we actually blocked it with one of our video units, so you couldn't even get the light in. All right, so we weren't thinking about the employee experience, we were just thinking about how to shove technology into a space. So one of the first things that we really landed on was the intentional use of space and trying to identify different segments of space based on the building types that we needed, based on the employees that we had in the locations where we needed those employees to be productive. And we came up with 5 segmentation models, and this has really guided us on how we build our buildings. And we currently, by the way, have about 20 projects underway, of which I'm going to walk you through about 3 or 4 of them. The first one is interesting. This is our customer showcase. This is where we want to bring our customers, we want to highlight our technology, we want it to have all of the the capabilities that we think are interesting for them so that we can show that off and they can actually see what it's like. The second one is a talent center. Where do we look for our next up-and-coming employees, and how do we entice those employees to want to work for Cisco, and how do we use that office as a means for bringing them into Cisco? The third is our operation centers. This is where we do the work that our company needs to run itself, whether that's HR or IT or various operations, legal. These are scattered throughout the U.S., typically in areas that are a little less costly from a real estate perspective, but still very important. Our product centers are where the innovation takes place. This is where we try to bring our engineers together, where we want them to actually work on projects and be leading thought leaders. And then finally, we have our enterprise centers. These are kind of like our campuses, and we have these scattered around the world where there's multiple disciplines that come together in a common environment where it's kind of a larger real estate footprint. Okay, so our first one that we did was Chicago. So now here we are, we came out of the pandemic, we said, okay, we've got an idea of how we're gonna segment, we know what we're trying to do, we're gonna build our first one. This is 2021, and it was a product center, really designed for those engineers, trying to allow them to collaborate and innovate better. Here we had about 120,000 square feet. We hired Gensler, they came in, helped us with our space design, and we went into the old post office, which is a beautiful building in downtown Chicago. The location was great, and we were able to consolidate multiple offices in that area into one office that we could bring those employees into and give them the things that they needed to be successful. Now, as I go through the next couple of slides, I'm going to highlight a couple of areas that we tried to quantify as we went into some of these designs for each of these segments. And we'll talk about some of the certifications, whether it's LEED certification or WELL certification, where we're shifting from traditional line voltage power to DC power, where we're using our video collaboration as, in many cases, a sensor as well as a collaboration tool. And we'll just kind of walk through how we're capturing data overall and using that data. Now, our first customer showcase was in New York City at Penn 1 in a 50-year-old building. Here we had about 58,000 square feet. We were getting ready to redesign it before the pandemic, so it was almost perfect timing. It gave us the pandemic to try to get it right, and then we brought employees back in coming right out of the pandemic. And at that time, the Penn 1 office, which was on multiple floors, what was heavily trafficked, but it was kind of spotty in terms of when the traffic would occur. And so we worked again with Gensler to build that, and that building now, we've probably had about 500 tours of customers that have come into that showcase to look at our technology and try to understand how that technology can fit into their environment. And you can see here, we achieved some pretty good certifications. We got LEED certified, even though it was a 50-year-old building. We couldn't touch the windows, but we used a lot of our technology to actually make it a much more sustainable environment. We got well health safety ratings. We have about 5,000 data points that we're tracking that we're putting into our various data algorithms and coming out with inferences. We're doing real-time air quality control. All of this, which was good, also came with a 5% CapEx reduction and a significant OpEx reduction, which is kind of interesting. How do we get all that new technology, all of that new space, all of that new optimization, but save money? And that's really what the goal was when we went into it, was not only to consolidate the footprint, but in that footprint to reinvest in a way that improved experience but lowered our overall operating costs. The second type of building, which is interesting, is in Atlanta. This is our building in what's called the CODA office. The CODA office is on the Georgia Tech campus, which is really interesting. It's a new building, and it's both a talent center as well as a customer showcase. So why do we choose the CODA building? Well, interestingly, Georgia Tech has some of the top engineers in the country, and Cisco was trying to hire a lot of engineers, and we knew that Georgia Tech had good ones. So we actually put the building right there, or put our office right in the building that was right on their campus, and we put a giant Cisco sign right on the top of the building facing the students. And so a testimonial to that is, after we got the building up, the first opportunity we had to actually do like a customer or a a student session to try to bring them into Cisco. It was sold out in the first 2 hours. So they were now excited to come to Cisco. So the strategy is working. So this office is about 90,000 square feet. It just got completed last year, and I've been down there a couple times, and it's amazing. It really brings together a nice combination of use of space, a lot of open space, and integrated that with technology. So here, again, we focus on LEED and WELL. We got further in the LEED certification because it was a newer building, and we also did very well in the WELL standards. In this case, we also invested, as we did in Penn 1, in Power over Ethernet. And we'll come back to that. Power over Ethernet is a low voltage option for lighting, shades, and blinds. And we find that that is a considerable cost savings opportunity and also from management of the employee experience. So it allows us to actually manage energy in a way that we can optimize it and provide increased value. The third office that we opened is in Paris, and this just opened. This Paris office is amazing. The tricky part here is we built it in an office building that was over 200 years old. And so there's a lot of historical reference. I think it was Louis the 18th or something like that used to use this as like his villa. And we had to preserve a lot of its natural integrity. There's a lot of furniture and a lot of classic art that's in there that we had to preserve. And so we had to work around all of those constraints, which was a little tricky. But it was 66,000 square feet, which is a pretty sizable footprint. And that building turned out extremely nice. Couple things there. Because we own the building, we actually purchased it, we could integrate with the BMS system. In this case, we partnered with Schneider so that a lot of the work that we were doing around gathering data from sensors, we could then take that sensor data, put it through some algorithms, and actually feed it into the BMS system that can make adjustments to our HVAC. So then we can get a full cycle. So in that case, just imagine like it's a bright day, we put the shades down allow us to lower the air conditioning. If it's a cool day, we lift the shades up, and it brings that full 360 view of the space with the environmentals back into the BMS system, which is really what our original intention was. Here we're getting about 8,000 data points that we feed into our algorithms, and that helps us to really create a nice space. As I mentioned, we had to reuse a lot of the furniture, and that actually helped us from a sustainability credits because we didn't have to buy new, so that was nice as well. Okay, so the good news is it seems to be working. At Cisco, we've been voted one of the best places to work in almost every country. In many countries, we're the #1. And we think it's a testimony not just to the spaces, but to the culture of the people that we have and the employees that we've invested in. And this is a key ingredient to that. We have to give our employees a combination of working from where they need to and also trying to entice them to come to the office where they can be more innovative and more collaborative. And it seems to be paying off. So as we went through that exercise of building, all those new buildings and spaces, we started to recognize that it's a journey. We don't always have the luxury of having new construction. In some cases, we're just trying to refresh a room and give it a new look, a new capability, put some new technology in there. In some cases, we're trying to refresh the entire workspace, the place, the floor. And then in some cases, we're actually moving walls around a bit, but it's not a new construction. So we look at those because they all have different degrees of difficulty. In some cases, it's easier to start out fresh, but it's also more expensive, and you have to wait for leases to get renewed. In other cases, it's interesting to go into an existing space and try to retrofit it. So we've learned that we have to be able to do all of those. And for our customers, it's interesting too, because not all of them are going through a new construction period. As we said earlier, this intersection of space design, workplace technology, and our work policy comes together to form our business outcomes. And for Cisco, it's all about the business, for us to continue to make that justification for investment. So we really think about how to bring those together in a way that we can monetize and have long-lasting, effects. And we have 4 primary outcomes that we now try to strive for. So remember, we're looking back at those buildings that we started out with coming out of the pandemic. We got a lot of the lessons learned from those. Now we have to apply it to the next 20 projects, and how do we prioritize the investments that are going to go into those projects? And so the first one is it's important that we always try to rebalance the space that we have. And we'll come back to what we mean by that, but it's important that we get the right mix of collaborative space and personal space. We're also constantly focused on Cisco's sustainability goals. That's a high priority for us as a company, and our goal is to get to net zero by 2040. We have a focus on health and wellness, getting our employees back to the office and having them feel safe and confident when they get into the office means we have to have a lot of sensor technology in those offices and be able to give them that data in a way they can consume it to feel confident. And then finally, our ability to digitize the real estate to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible with the real estate that we have. And in many cases, that gives us a better idea of where we need more space, less space, and where we need to route traffic. So if I kind of go through these a little bit more one by one, again, the rebalancing the space, this is about how do we focus on whether or not we're trying to collaborate or socialize. It's really about, are we using unassigned space or are we using either assigned or unassigned space? And we'll come back to that in a minute. And then is it a frictionless experience? So let's talk about that for a second. Let's think about that ad hoc versus bookable space. So you would think initially that bookable space is the way to go, right? Like, well, I go in there, I reserve my space, I go into, let's say, Microsoft Outlook, and I block it out, and I put in a series, and I say, we're going to meet as a team every week for an hour for the next 6 months. Well, it turns out that that's extremely inefficient, and it took us a little while to realize that. But what happens? You book it for 20 people, how many show up? 10. You book it for like every week, and then you find out that some weeks you don't need the meeting, but you leave it scheduled. And then sometimes you book it for 6 months, but your project ends over 3 months, but yet that space is still taken up. So the reservation system approach, which seems intelligent on the front end, actually we found gives us actually lack of space utilization. Instead, we try to go to more of an ad hoc model, where when you need space, it's just very easy to get. And you don't have to go searching for it. It's just easy to find, easy to go secure and then use, and you can use the type of space that you need for the type of meeting that you want. The tricky part is it's not as easy to do than just reserving a space because you have to know what spaces are available when you want them. So technology comes in. And so that was one of the things that we really focused on is building the technology into our applications that would allow those employees to actually use ad hoc space versus bookable space. And in Cisco's case, we have a ratio. Before the pandemic, I think it was about 4 people in the office and 2 people outside of the office. After the pandemic, it actually flipped, where now we have 2 people in the office and 4 people out. So as we think about our workspace and that ad hoc space, you'll see too that we've realized we have to have external collaboration capabilities in a lot of our spaces. So the technology that we used to bring ad hoc spaces together is a visual signage display that we provide. When you walk into the office, you can see this display, and the display will tell you which rooms are available, what types of room they are, and you can just go reserve that room at that moment in time. And then you can invite other people to join you to come there as well. We also have little displays outside of the doors where you can see if the room is reserved or not just by whether or not there's a red or a green light on it. What we found is employees are willing to walk about 50 paces to go find a space. At 51, they start getting mad. So we try to put these little signs like every 50 feet. Okay, so as we think about space, we knew that we needed some spaces to concentrate. So this is where there's some me space. In Cisco, we want to have enough we spaces that you can get dedicated work done. Some of that we space can also be in an open environment, but where there's areas that you can go to be a little bit more isolated. Well, you have about 10 minutes, and that's about all you need from the time that you see that room to the time that you get there. So as soon as you reserve it, you have 10 minutes, but it's all real time. So we know that in every space, whether or not it's utilized in real time. And that data is getting fed right back into that control panel. So you know immediately if somebody's in there, and so if they're still sitting there when you're trying to reserve it, obviously it's reserved, but then you've got 10 minutes to go get into that room.
So if I booked it, I got 10 minutes to get there, get going, otherwise it's free for anybody else.
That's right, yeah. And that's configurable for everybody. You know, if you want to make it longer, you can make it longer. Mm-hmm. Here's some spaces that are a little bit more designed around collaboration. You can bring people together. This might be for like a nice little team building event. You can pull in, 5 or so employees. You can have a nice little session. You can bring in some remote employees to attend into that. This is more like a learning environment that we set up. You can see a lot of natural light coming in, the ability to control the shades so that we can get a good visual, really good acoustics in the room, a lot of connectivity, big screen so that you can actually see from all around the room and bring in remote participation. So these rooms are popular when we try to do training events, etc. Probably our most popular spaces are our socialization spaces. These are where it's not really typically reserved at all. You would just go into a big socialization space and you'd find some space where you might want to gather with a couple of people. You might want to go get some heads down work, but these spaces are usually a little bit more interesting for people to just go on the spur of the moment. This is also where we have things like our coffee machines that you can go grab a coffee, and it just seems like these are always an exciting area, across all of our buildings. This one's interesting. We have about 10% of our office space, the rooms, are in these little huddle spaces that are unassigned, and they're just right out in the open floor plate where you can just walk out, grab a spot. So if you have like 2 employees that happen to be just walking near each other and say, hey, let's sit down and talk about it, it's really easy to go do that. So we try to put about 10% of our space into that kind of a configuration.
So there is not a dedicated office for the employees?
Very few. We went from about a 20-80 model to an 80-20 model. So we have some dedicated space, but for the most part, and a lot of offices have none. Like if you go into that Atlanta office, our CFO and our CEO often go there and they don't have an office. So they will just be out in the open. And it is interesting, like by doing that, it creates a culture where the people feel like if those people earn the commute, then I earn the commute too. Like I can go to the office if they're willing to go to the office. So we try to put them in a situation where, everybody can see that we're all in this together. Another space here, just a nice comfortable spot where you can get together and bring multiple people. It varies in terms of how many people you bring in. So you can see like repeatedly, there's a focus on small collaboration. It's not big collaboration. It's trying to get 3 to 5 people together, having a meaningful discussion, do some innovation, ad hoc spaces so that it's very easy to get them and they're always available. And for us, that's an important thing. And what we've done is we've tried to standardize on all of those room configurations that I just shared, and we've actually cataloged them in about 80% of our rooms that we build in each of our new builds fall into one of these 15 configurations. So now we've got standardized design guides that make it very easy for us to start to build new space because we just tap into these design guides and we know what type of space we're trying to do based on the number of people that we're trying to create collaboration centers for. So I think I gave you a link up front for the design guides, but if you want that, that's here again. And they're really insightful. It makes it very easy for you to understand what kind of furniture we used, what do we do in the space, how did the technology work in, those kind of things. That all comes together in the design guides. It's not just about the Cisco part of it, it's about the full experience. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Cisco's sustainability goals. And for us, as I mentioned, we're trying to get to net zero by 2040, and one of the keys for us is moving to low voltage power. That gives us a lot of management capability of the power that we're consuming, but it also gives us the ability to actually lower our operating costs. And at the same time, it's going to lower our carbon footprint. So let's look at this a little bit more. When we look at the network, historically the network has been for IT. Now we see that the network is a combination of energy plus IT, right, which is really new. It's like the 4th utility now is energy coming onto the network. And so you can see here that we've been able to integrate Ethernet as the backbone for carrying both power and IT. And that allows us now to manage things like shades and blinds, and we have power desks and a lot of new PoE devices and sensors that can plug now into the network so that we can manage it alongside the network. Now, what's interesting is from an installation perspective, you think, which one's harder? On the traditional line voltage, it can be pretty labor intensive, right? Like we have to go pull a lot of conduit, the wires have to go in the conduit. On the right-hand side, it's a lot faster to pull a cable, and you don't need to go through the same permitting process, which makes life a little easier. And so we move away from conduits into things more like cable trays. And by putting them in the cable trays, now I can pull a lot of cables at once instead of one at a time. You'll see, for example, on the left-hand side here, we've got it, going through the conduits. On the right-hand side, that cable cluster there of yellow serves about 15,000 square feet. Now, in our rooms, we always try to take the various room systems, whether it's the lighting, the shades, the blinds, along with the collaboration capabilities in the room for audio-visual, as well as the building management systems, and tie that all together. Now, historically, those have all been disparate systems. You'd have a bunch of different boxes on the table. We've seen all those tables with all those boxes. We've integrated everything into one common user interface that brings all those systems together, whether it's Cisco's or not, and we've made those integrations available. I don't think I have a QR code in here for the integrations, but if you email me, I can get you access to the integrations as well that bring all that together into a common environmental system. But this makes it easy. When you walk in the room, you can quickly see what's happening in the room, and if you want to adjust anything in the room, you have the ability to do it from there. And we call this our room navigator, and you can see it, not only can you adjust what's happening in the room, but I'll show you in a second, we'll also give you the environmentals for the room so that you can start to adjust as you need. Now, for everyone in this room, what's interesting is knowing those environmentals also lets you know when something's out of norm. And if it's out of norm, we alarm on it. So now our employees know that something's wrong, often before our facilities people know there's something wrong, but now the facilities people can go contact the building owners before there's a major problem. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about health and wellness. And this is really our ability to try to optimize the space, try to make it as comfortable as possible for the employee, try to meet our well standards where possible, and of course, for us, full transparency of what's happening in the space is key for the employee to feel confident in the space. So here's a really nice example. This is this is at our New York City office. Now you can imagine in New York on Penn 1, which is right across from Madison Square Garden, it can get pretty loud. And so one of the things we focused on was how do we keep the noise levels low, as well as try to keep it as bright and airy. If you remember before, I showed you how those offices look, where we block out all of the windows. We'd often put our offices for our executives right up against the windows, so the executive would have the view and then everybody else would have a conference room with no windows. So we actually moved everything inside the building so that we opened up the windows to the employees for those common spaces. Now you'll see a lot of natural light coming in. You'll see we also used K13 on the ceiling for noise suppression with a foam. In all of our rooms, we've got them acoustically isolated between rooms, and around all the doors we have gaskets to keep the noise from coming out. So in fact, like what we've created here is actually a pretty pleasant environment in what otherwise would have been a pretty noisy environment. And so we're pretty excited about that. And that's something that we try to repeat in all of our buildings. Here's a good idea of what you see when you come into the office, into a space. You'll very quickly, transparency will tell you how are we doing in terms of the environmentals, how's the air quality, how's the humidity, how's the temperature, and that usually gives us a good idea of whether or not that room is going to be comfortable. And of course, we can feed that back into the BMS systems, so that if we need to adjust that, if you get 10 people in that room, you probably don't need as much heat, because those people are giving off heat. And so we use all that in terms of the algorithms to determine how to optimize the space. Okay, so let's talk now about the digitizing our real estate. And I think this, probably for this audience, this is probably the most interesting part, because now we've talked about we have space. That's typically the purview of the real estate designers to figure out that space. But now we have to operate the space. So that's where it comes into the digitizing the platform. So how do we take all that data that we have and make it meaningful and useful for us to run the actual business? And we call this our informed design, and we think that that informed design gives us the ability to inform facilities as well as the other stakeholders. So here you'll see we have a lot of sensors. I talked about in New York, we were gathering 5,000 data points. And then in Atlanta, we were gathering 8,000 data points. We get the data from a variety of different sources. So we have cameras that capture who's come into and out of a space, right? So we have those tripwires. We use our Wi-Fi access points that can tell us how people are moving through the space, and we can use Wi-Fi as an integration into the mobile devices, so you can see all the people's mobiles, where they're moving, so you can see flow. We've got our room devices that have sensors built into them, which interestingly, for us, it was actually a money saver because otherwise we had to buy independent sensors. Now we integrated them into the room devices, and we get the sensors from the room devices instead of having separate sensors. We have that navigator that tells us a little bit of information on what's happening in the room, control the room, and we can also put the navigators outside the room to tell us if the room is occupied. We have our air quality sensors, which we have third-party sensors, and we also have integrated sensors that go into some of our room systems, et cetera. The shades and blinds also get tied into the system so that we can get information from them. There's a lot of data that's coming in terms of how much light is actually hitting the windows. In some cases, we have actually solar panels on the windows that gather the sunlight, turn that to energy. We maximize that energy to then run the various systems inside the room. We take all of that data and then combine that into an analytics engine and then tie that into our workspace tools. And that gives us the ability to digitize the real estate, right? And that's a new concept for us, but it gives us a lot of operating flexibility with a lot of operational insight. So here's what I see when I walk into the office. So here we are in New York City. I'll walk in and I can see pretty quickly all of my spaces. I can see what's happening with those spaces. I can see that in all that data from each of those sensors being displayed. This is something that we call Cisco Spaces, is the name of the software that we use. And it gives us just enough information that allows us to go figure out how I'm going to go conduct my day while I'm in the office. So here we get all of that data. We start to run it through various analytics engines. We've got some of our own. So inside of our own tools, like our Cisco WebEx, we can gather this insight and display it and use it. But also we integrate into third parties. So this is the IBM Triregro that we're piping that into, and they're then running analysis, on that data for us and giving that back to us. So the third party integrations are really interesting because it gives you a lot more flexibility. You can do a lot more with it, and that's something we continue to invest in.
Do you use REST APIs for that, or do you have plugins?
We have plugins that we use so that's open, and we make those available. So if anybody wants to use them, our Cisco Spaces is the platform, and that platform is fully open and has a bunch of plugins already available for it. So what's interesting is, let me get through some of this. Oh, there we go. What's interesting is that we realize that the real estate design process is kind of backwards. And when technology became so important for us to insert into the designs, we recognized that it was often too late. And so that became a problem for us. As we went back and tried to change the designs, that was a major redo, and that got pretty expensive and often was too late. So what we've been really focused on is moving technology to the forefront of the design conversation. And that's why I think it's important for everybody in this room to really understand how technology can influence design, but how technology can also influence facilities and operations. Because what happens if we don't get it right and we don't get the technology that we need on the front end, then we can't take advantage of it on the back end. And so I would argue that for all of us, we want to try to have a voice in that process, just to say, hey, have you thought about the operation side before you go do the design? Because often we just inherit that and we have to make do. But that's not going to be the future. I think there was a JLL report a couple of years ago, you guys might have seen it, which kind of highlighted the demand for this role of a facilities manager is in high demand, and there's not enough people in the industry that are coming into that profession. And so you can think about it in terms of we're not going to have enough people to do all these jobs, so we need to start to automate. And so I think for all of us, we need to get out in front of that and share that with the real estate designers, so not only do they have pretty spaces, but those spaces are actually something that we can operate efficiently as we go forward. Okay, so as I mentioned, that was all about Cisco. That was our journey. So we learned a lot. We obviously got through the pandemic. We had a little head start. We spent some time really thinking about the buildings that we wanted to build for the types of employees that we had in those locations, and we set out to do that. And based on that, we learned that we could create spaces that were technically integrated with good design principles, and we started to share that with our customers. And what I'll share here is a couple of examples, and we've got hundreds of these, but here at 66 Hudson Yards, this is the Tishman Spiral building. If you've ever seen it, it's amazing. It's a beautiful building, and it's one of the newest buildings in the skyline. But it has these converged networks that we talked about are all throughout that building. So they've really leaned into the power over Ethernet and trying to tie that into their overall efficiency and getting their sustainability. So they've really embraced, which is really exciting. Down in DC, which is where I'm from, we have the GSA. The GSA is the largest land holder in all of the US. And what's interesting, they created something with Cisco called the Workforce Innovation Lab, where they tried to look at their workspaces and try to build an environment like we just shared inside of one of their facilities. I think it's on 1800F? Yeah, 1800F. And so that becomes a showcase for all the employees to come, and some of the facilities managers and the real estate owners will come in and look at how they've designed so they can have ideas they can take back. But in that, they've embraced their workspace, and they've made that workspace available to other employees. And that's another model that we're starting to see a lot of, where we have excess space. Can we create shared space that we can bring other employees in and they can hot desk? And so the GSA is looking at various hot desking options where they have this really nice space. They might have a bunch of other spaces that are not so nice. The people will come to the nice space, and as long as they can reserve the space and when they get in there ad hoc, then they can take advantage of it. But that building is really interesting. We're doing something too with Berkeley Labs with them, which allows us to go validate a lot of the claims that we jointly had predicted would be operational efficiencies. We're now going back to Berkeley, and Berkeley is actually putting their fingerprints on it and their stamp, saying that these hypotheses are actually reality. So even though we saw them at Cisco, now we can prove out that the government is seeing the same thing.
Question. For GSA Innovation Lab, they did it for 1 year, then they changed the whole concept of the business?
They do, but yes, short answer is yes. What they're going to do there, though, is they're just going to move the space around. So they're still going to have a workforce innovation lab. It'll just be reconfigured. So we're going through that reconfiguring right now. The CIO actually was asked, what are you going to do after the year? And she said, what we're not going to do is get rid of it. Like, it's working so well. They said it's the #1 innovation that they've ever had in the GSA in terms of their innovation. So they're sticking behind it, and they're just going to expand it and move it to some different floors.
And to be advanced to this, we went there and we got some ideas to be implemented in our hotel.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
So really, it's a good, that's good.
Yeah, it's interesting that if you're not on the floor where the new technology is integrated with the spaces, you just go one floor away, you're like shocked. Like the dichotomy between the two spaces is so stark, and I think that's why all the employees want to go there and work.
So in a typical room, like a conference room, how much more expensive is it when you have all those devices versus additional ones?
It's a good question. You know, honestly, we found that it actually saves us money. And that's kind of why we focused on it. Not only improves the experience, but we actually save money. We don't have to buy as many devices. And if you think about those other devices that sit on the desk, they're not cheap. And so our ability to integrate those and get them off the desk and then normalize everything back onto the network and put it into one common device. No. Up front we save because we don't have to buy all those other devices. I mean, we still have sensors, right? But the sensors are often built right into our product, so we don't have to buy a lot of new sensors, and then we just have to integrate those sensors, and that integration's already done. So we don't have to reintegrate. We just use our existing integrations. Make sense? No. What part?
If you put more devices, it becomes more money.
I'm sorry, what devices are you talking about? Are you talking about the video devices?
And move with multiple sensors, cameras versus a typical camera remote solution that was mobile.
Well, in our situation, as I mentioned, we're a heavy collaboration company because we have so many remote workers that we have to put video technology into our spaces. The video technology has the sensors built into the screens. So if we had, a screen, the screen actually has the sensors. So we don't have to go out and buy new sensors. The sensors are already there. Our Wi-Fi access points already have the sensors in there, so we don't have to buy new sensors. So we just leverage the technology that we already have in a way that gives us that flexibility to gather that data.
What happens when the sensors go off?
That's a good question. I've not seen that happen yet. I'm sure it could. Yeah.
They go off all the time.
Yeah.
The sensor's like $30, but I gotta pay somebody $600 for it.
So it's a great point. Now, so let's play that out for a sec, and let's expand the conversation a little bit. Not just sensors, but like, what if a light goes out, right, or anything? Historically, you've had to do a bunch of troubleshooting to go figure out like what's gone wrong, where is it broken. You've got to have somebody go up in the ceiling, start looking for. In this case, because it's all normalized on the network, we just go into the network, we run out, we send out, a query to each of the devices to see which one's working or not. We can isolate it very quickly, and then we can just swap that out. So actually, it saves a ton of time in troubleshooting and getting things resolved. You still, of course, would have to go in and pop out, a sensor potentially on. In our access points, you can actually remove and put in new sensors if you need to. You can also plug in third-party sensors. I don't know how you do it in a screen. I'm sure there's a way. I think so. I don't know your skill set exactly, but I trust you. I'd let you do it. This building is amazing. So in Europe, 22 Bishopsgate is like it's definitely the biggest, it's the most expensive, it's the fastest leased building ever in London. And we worked with Lipton Rogers to go design this with all the latest technology that I just outlined. And so they've got 42 kilometers of Ethernet all scattered through that building so they can run on low voltage and they can integrate their systems. And so they get 32,000 data points a minute. We're talking about 8,000, they've got even more. And so that's pretty exciting. And that was about a year and a half ago, I think we built that. And then if we go into APJC, down in Australia, we have this 80 Ann Street building, and a little less about the technology, a lot more about the collaboration and how they actually collaborate and how they have a mix between their remote workers and their in-office, in-person workers, and how they've built that dynamic very similar to Cisco's. And so they're leveraging a lot of similar technology, but they're actually also adopting a lot of the policies that we've adopted on our side.
Question. So Cisco, like, at least in my case, I know Cisco is the one who make all these switches, network equipment, what have you, some technologies. But you guys also doing services for consultant, like they contract Cisco to do technology and innovative ways of doing design their buildings and making them.
A little bit. I mean, yes, but that's not really the point. So let me kind of play it back a little differently. So yes, Cisco has services, and we can go sit with the customer, and we can help them design technology into the real estate. We can do that. There are a lot of companies out there that do a much better job of doing that, though, and we often partner with them. So if you get into some of the designers, we're now educating the designers on the front end. So if you're like a Gensler, for example, we work with Gensler. We talk about the technology, talk about what we're trying to get out of the space, and then they will actually go do the design. They take that design and they give that to the MEPs. The MEPs will actually do the design at that point and go bring in the project managers to go execute. So what we try to do is make available all of our technology blueprints to each of those stages of the design process so they can get access to them without having to reinvent. So we can work, we have what we call advisory services on the front end where we can work with those customers on trying to identify those technology capabilities that they want to insert into their designs, but we don't do design. Like, that's not our thing. Like, we leave that to the Genslers of the world.
Is there any cost associated with like operating software on a year, 2-year, 5-year type of agreement, maintenance agreements, particularly for that, if they change the graphics or maybe some of the technology, the hardware is particularly changing over time, and we need to upgrade on that part, but particularly maybe on the software.
Yeah, there's two ways to look at that. One is on a normal basis, historically, we've had maintenance agreements on everything that, we sell. All those integrations continue to get updated. And that's like the normal BAU, percentage of how much you buy, that goes against the maintenance agreement. That's all multiple years. But if you fast forward, we're also looking at subscription-based models, and we're starting to deploy them where you can basically say, hey, I want to buy a subscription for 3 years. When that subscription's done, I want the latest technology, bring that in. And that makes it really easy for you to stay at the state of the art and just manage it at an OpEx level so that you know exactly what you're getting, and includes the investment in the hardware as well as all the software and the maintenance, and then you get a refresh. So there's different ways to do that. Okay, so how are we doing on time? Oh, we're good. Okay, so closing thoughts. I look at it through like these 3 L's: the learn, the leverage, the lead. And I know for everyone in this room, like trying to figure out what does this mean for you? What is the so what? I think there's a lot here in terms of technology for facilities management. I think the first thing is, hopefully you see now that you've got to, in your profession, you've got to become a student of technology. Like there's no choice. That's the way everything's moving. So you've got to get out in front of it. I would say go learn a little bit more about 2 things. Learn about low voltage and how that low voltage is going to make management of your systems easier by normalizing them onto a common backbone, and learn about how energy and IT can co-reside. In addition, I would learn as much as you can about how to leverage the data, how to incorporate that data into the analytics, and how that analytics can actually run your systems with your input. That's going to make your life a lot easier, because then you get to automation and you can start to simplify your operations. So you've got to spend a little time there just getting smart on those 2 things. And I'm sure you already are, but just get smarter. The second one is around the leverage, which is, this seems pretty tricky, right? Like if you look at what we did, you'd say, oh my God, like we could never do that. That's a lot, right? To redesign your entire office and bring all that technology. The reality is, I would suggest start with a small pilot, right? Start with a part of a floor. Start with maybe a floor at the most. Start with a little bit and get it working. That's usually really manageable. Get some learnings under your belt, right? Because you're going to learn, and your environment's going to be different than our environment. Your policies are different than our policies, and your software is different than our software. So try to figure it out on a small scale. And then once you get on the small scale, then you can start to expand it. And we found that expand model makes it a lot easier than trying to bite off the entire thing up front. Once you figure it out in the small scale, then you bring it to your designers. And the designers can design it into the larger scale, but at least then you know how to operate it. And so I would say focus on something that you can get your arms around from an operations before you start designing large-scale pilots or buildings. The third one is you got to lead. So as mentioned before, like if we wait until the end of the design cycle, it's too late. And the designers are great at designing beautiful spaces. They know nothing about technology. And as much as we're doing to try to educate them, the folks in this room are going to know those designers and the real estate people a lot better than we're going to. So you've got to let them know that they have to think about the operational side on the back end, which means think about the technology that's going to go into the building before they design it. Because once I design, I can't rip out the technology because it's too late. So if I want to put in, for example, power over Ethernet, and I've already put in line voltage, I can't go back. I could, but it'd be really expensive. So I think for me, that's probably about as much as I wanted to cover. I know there was a lot there. Again, I've got these QR codes. If you want any of the information I have, the one thing I didn't have was those integrations. If you're interested in those, just ping me. But I hope there's enough information here that it gives you an idea of that Cisco does not start with an SYCEO. It's a CICSEO. And so we're not the food company, we're the technology company, but we are in real estate, and we are trying to make real estate and facilities come together around technology. So thank you.